I wrote a letter to my husband, then tore it into pieces, not out of anger, but because I no longer needed him to feel like I existed. And um, I'm at 40. I used to think I was just a quiet shadow in a house where my husband no longer looked at me and my child was soon leaving. But then Jack, my son, took me to a cabin in the snowy woods, and there, in the bone-chilling cold, I found the feeling of being alive again through laughter, a fall into the snow, and a photograph that made me realize, so I'm still me. Have you ever lived so long for others that you forgot who you used to be? Share with me. Because maybe my journey of awakening started just like yours. Anyway, I never thought I'd find myself stepping into a wooden cabin in the middle of a snow-covered pine forest, especially not with my son, but sometimes it's the things we don't plan that become the turning points we need. Jack had just turned 21 last month. He was nearly a head taller than me, quiet, but his eyes always held a gentle warmth, quietly observant. The way he asked me that morning, "Mom, do you want to go somewhere for a few days?" made me pause. I guess my son had noticed the emptiness in my eyes, the dinners where his father, Daniel, had been absent for weeks, and how I still clean the kitchen every night out of a meaningless habit. There's a small cabin near a lake, the one I went camping with my class. It's quiet, really beautiful, Jack said, his hands softly steering the wheel. That's how our trip began. No concrete plans, no travel itinerary, just a mother and son driving up the mountain. When the car turned onto the snow-covered road, I felt my heart soften. All around us were pine trees, silent and white. The wind whispered through the bare branches, and the cabin came into view. Small, weathered, but with a warmth that felt like memory. Jack quickly pushed the door open. "Still the same as before," he smiled, a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. The room had an old fireplace, a few wool-covered armchairs, and a faded oak dining table. I stood there quietly for a long while. For the past 15 years, I had lived surrounded by gas stoves, washing machines, and the sound of Daniel's business phone calls. It had been a long, long time since I'd had a space just for myself. Evening came quickly. Snow began to fall again. Jack lit the fire, and I removed my wool scarf, sinking down onto the floor rug, watching the flames dance. It felt like rewinding time to something more primal and simple. "Are you hungry?" I asked. Jack nodded. "Even instant noodles are fine, as long as you eat with me." Just one sentence, and I nearly cried. I had forgotten that just sitting down to eat with someone, without rushing, without having to play background to anyone else, was something precious. In the cabin, Jack and I sat comfortably, enjoying our meal together. No one said much, but that silence was warmer than any birthday party I had ever thrown. That night, I lay on the small wooden bed, wrapped in a thick down blanket, staring up at the cabin ceiling. I heard the wind teasing the tin roof, the soft crackling of firewood on the other side of the room, and the gentle breathing of Jack, my only son, who had pulled me out of a coldness I thought had no way back. I whispered to myself, maybe this wasn't just a trip to escape the cold. Maybe this is where I start living again. I woke up to a faint scent of coffee drifting through the crack of the wooden door. Morning light filtered through the thin linen curtain, as gentle as a second blanket draped over the room. I got out of bed, slipped on a wool sweater, and suddenly saw Jack standing by the kitchen window, a cup of coffee in his hands, eyes gazing distantly out into the snow. "You're up early?" I asked softly, afraid to disturb the quietness of the moment. Jack turned and smiled. "This place makes me want to hold on to every moment. And also, I make great coffee. Want to try some?" I sat down on the rocking chair near the fireplace. Jack handed me the cup of coffee, its warmth comforting. Neither of us said anything more. I could only hear the crunching snow outside the porch, the gentle crackle of the firewood in the stove, and the steady breathing of a mother trying to relearn how to simply be still. We spent the whole morning tidying up the cabin, not because it was necessary, but because it gave us something to do together. Jack wiped the windows while I folded blankets and put away some old things into the wooden cabinet. Every small task felt like stitching back together the thread of connection long forgotten between mother and son. I couldn't remember the last time the two of us had just been together without interruptions from phones, emails, or petty arguments, but here everything felt simpler and lighter. By noon, the snow was still falling, but the sky had brightened. Jack pulled me out of the cabin. "Have you ever gone snow hiking, Mom?" I laughed and shook my head, a little shy as I looked up the bulky snowshoes he handed me. "No, I'm more used to walking through markets." "Well, Len, today you're walking through the woods with me." We stepped into the soft snow, our feet gently sinking into the pristine white surface. The pine forest was still, with only the sound of our breaths and the occasional rustle of branches. I hadn't expected to feel such peace from something as simple as just walking. Jack put his palm on me the moment I walked in. About his past camping trips with friends here. His voice was no longer dry and curt like usual, but warm, filled with enthusiasm. I realized my son had grown, not just in stature, but in the way he listened, the way he looked at me, without judgment, without rushing. When we paused in an open clearing, Jack said, "When I was little, every time you had a headache or felt upset, you'd always go out to the backyard. You didn't know I noticed, did you?" I froze. "I thought you were too young to understand." Jack shook his head thoughtfully. "I saw, and I always wished you had someone to lean on, so you wouldn't have to keep holding it all together." I turned away, blinking rapidly to keep the tears from falling. In that moment, I didn't just see Jack as my son, but as a young man, full of understanding and maturity. A part of me felt supported. Back at the cabin, I sat on the porch steps, my cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Jack handed me a cup of hot ginger tea. "Where do you want to go tomorrow, Mom?" I shook my head, watching the snow continue to fall silently. "No, well, let's stay here a few more days." I wanted to stretch this feeling out, this feeling that for so many years as a wife and a mother I had forgotten, to be myself without needing to be perfect. That night, the house was enveloped in an unusual stillness. Daniel still hadn't come home. I stood in the kitchen drying the last plate from the leftover birthday dishes, then hung the towel on its hook. Jack was upstairs. I could hear soft music from his room, instrumental melodies playing steadily like a whisper without clear meaning. I wondered if he was thinking about what had happened at the beach. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Walking into the living room, I sat down on the sofa and pulled a light blanket over my legs. Every object in this house was so familiar, from the reading lamp with the broken hinge to the faded wedding photo hanging slightly askew on the wall. Everything felt like a part of my life, and yet now, I wasn't sure if I was living in it or just existing in a role someone else had chosen for me. I sighed. Suddenly, I heard light footsteps on the stairs, and then Jack appeared in the doorway holding a glass of water. "Not asleep yet, Ma?" "I was just about to. You?" "I'm not sleepy either." He walked over and sat beside me, still holding the glass. A few seconds passed in silence. Then I spoke. "Did today feel a little different to you?" Jack looked at me and nodded slightly. "You didn't seem like yourself, a bit distant." I gave a faint smile. "Maybe it's my age. When you reach a certain point, you tend to think more about the things you've lost." "You haven't lost anything," Jack said, and something in his voice made me turn and look him in the eyes. "You're the one holding everything together. Without you, I think this family would have fallen apart a long time ago." My heart tightened. Jack's words were a gentle but painful reminder. Had I really kept everything together? Or was I just pretending not to see the cracks? "Daniel," I hesitate, "your father, do you feel like he's slipping away?" Jack was silent for a long moment, then answered, "I think he's already gone. A long time ago." Closed my eyes, not out of shock, but because it had never been spoken aloud before, and now my own son had confirmed it. "But you're still here," Jack continued, "and so am I. We still have each other." I turned toward my son, grateful for his words. Jack's presence felt comforting and supportive. In that moment, I didn't see him as the small child I once carried, but as a grown man, a man with a heart big enough to see the pain even my husband no longer noticed. I didn't say anything else. We sat there together in silence, listening to the ticking of the clock as if time itself was giving me a pause to reflect, to breathe, and to understand that even if Daniel had forgotten who I was still seen by my own son. I know how long I had been sitting after Jack went back to his room, maybe a few minutes, maybe an hour, but when I finally stood up, the usual haze and weariness suddenly lifted, as if someone had pulled a heavy curtain off my mind. I walked into the bathroom, turned on the light, and looked straight into the mirror. The face staring back at me was no longer the youthful woman in the old wedding photo. That I'd known for a long time. But tonight, for the first time in years, I truly saw myself. Not already. Not Daniel's wife. Not Jack's mom. It's just me, a woman slowly losing herself in the quiet of days when no one asked how she was, in the dullness of wordless meals, in the kind of silent sacrifice so constant that even she had forgotten it was being made. I braced both hands on the sink and exhaled sharply. A slight chill ran down my spine. It wasn't pain. It was clarity. I remembered the early days of being a wife, a mother. I once had dreams, opening a small bakery, writing a book, learning another language. But bit by bit, I had folded all of it into family dinners, into Jack's good behavior, into Daniel's work schedule. I had lived for everyone else and forgotten this one truth. If a woman no longer lives for herself, she disappears, even if she's still present in every family photo. A tear rolled down my cheek, but this time it wasn't a tear of self-pity. It was a tear of awakening. I no longer wanted to be the invisible part of this house. I didn't want to be the woman Daniel was merely grateful for her patience. I didn't want to be the mother Jack looked at with quiet sadness as he watched her fade into silence. I wanted to find my voice again. I wanted to choose a day filled with music, curiosity, something that made me smile for no reason at all. I wasn't sure what I would do, but one thing I knew, tomorrow would be different. I looked at myself in the mirror one more time. The dark circles under my eyes were still there, but there was a glimmer of something, almost pride. I didn't need to be younger, prettier, or praised by anyone. I just needed to live true to what I really felt. That night I lay down and closed my eyes, not with anxiety or regret, but with a fresh, powerful sense of calm, as if I had just come through a storm and was standing in the first light of dawn. I had just started to doze off when the phone rang, sharp and cold, as if pulling me back to earth from a dream left unfinished. I glanced at the clock. 2:08. Hey, I jolted upright, my heart pounding. Jack? My son's name was the first thing to flash through my mind. Instinctively, as a mother, I grabbed the phone, my voice trembling. Hello? On the other end was a deep, urgent male voice. Are you Daniel's wife? I froze. Yes, what's going on? We're calling from the Central Hospital. Your husband, Daniel, collapsed while working late. He's currently being treated in the cardiology emergency unit. Can you come right away? I stood there stunned and could only say, I'm on my way. I drove through the night, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The streets were deserted, amber streetlights stretching out like tangled lines of memory in my mind. Questions spun wildly. Is Daniel okay? Had there been any signs? Why didn't I notice? But what surprised me most was the feeling in my chest. I wasn't afraid of losing Daniel. I was unsettled because something hadn't been said, something unfinished, even though I thought I had let it go. I arrived at the hospital and rushed into the waiting area, my eyes fixed on the closed doors of the emergency room. A few minutes later, a young doctor stepped out and removed his mask. He's out of danger now. Luckily, you got him here in time. I nodded in thanks, but my heart still wouldn't slow down. When I was allowed in, Daniel was lying there, pale, exhausted, the face I had known as cold and distant, now strangely vulnerable. I stood still for a long time before sitting down beside him. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at me. There was nothing dramatic about it, just a tired and honest gaze. He whispered, I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know what to say. In that moment, all the anger, the emptiness, the disappointment I had held on to seemed to scatter. Daniel, the husband I thought had disappeared into his work, was here at his most fragile, and I, the woman who had just begun to remember who she was suddenly faced with the question, if he truly changes, what will I do? That night, sitting by the hospital bed, I didn't sleep. But I no longer felt the urge to run. I wasn't sure what would happen with Daniel, with me, with Jack. But I knew one thing. Every journey of awakening must pass through interruption, because it's in those moments that we truly understand where we want to go. A week after Daniel was discharged from the hospital, the house became strangely quiet. No more slamming doors in a rush or midnight phone calls. Daniel started working from home. The doctor said he needed complete rest for at least 3 weeks. He accepted it reluctantly. As for me, I didn't know what to do with the space that now existed between us. I still got up early as usual, made coffee, tidied the kitchen, prepared breakfast for Jack. But now, Daniel also sat there, in the spot where only an empty chair used to remain. We exchanged polite glances, a few health questions, then silence once again filled the kitchen. That afternoon, when Jack went out to meet his friends, I stepped into Daniel's temporary office. He was staring out the window, as if something out there might save him from the things left unsaid. I spoke first. Wait, we need to talk. He turned around, eyes tired, but not avoiding mine. I sat down in the chair across from him. Neither of us said anything for a long while. Then I asked, did you ever realize how lonely I've been? Lenya looked at me, this time for longer, then nodded. Yes, but I didn't know what to do with it. Work was the only thing I felt like I was still good at. I gave a dry laugh. What about me? What about Jack? What about all the dinners I waited for alone? And he didn't respond. He only looked down at his hands, as if he could find the answer there. I know you're angry, Daniel said slowly, but I was afraid that if I stopped, I'd have to face the truth, that I'm no longer the man you once chose. My chest tightened. In all the years we lived together, Daniel had never let any cracks show in his armor. Until now. I took a deep breath, then said, I don't need someone perfect. I just need someone truly present. Daniel looked up. For the first time in many years, his eyes were misty. I thought I had lost you, Daniel. But you know what? The scariest part was I had already lost myself before that. And that conversation didn't end with any resolution. But it was an honest beginning. No grand gestures, no promises. We didn't embrace and cry, didn't try to rewrite our old love story. But for the first time in a long while, we saw each other not through roles, not through obligation, but through real eyes. That evening, as I stood by the kitchen window, Jack came home. I turned to look at my son, still the boy I once knew, but growing with each passing hour. And I knew perhaps this healing journey wasn't just for me and Daniel, but like for an entire family, one that once thought it was already broken. Jack didn't ask anything when he saw Daniel and me sitting at the dinner table that evening. His gaze swept over us, a mix of surprise and caution, as if he were looking into a familiar room where all the furniture had been rearranged. The leaves the floor. I handed him a bowl of soup, my hands slightly trembling. Daniel quietly spooned rice into his own bowl. No one said much, but something felt different, a kind of quiet that no longer weighed heavy, but felt like the opening bars of a song just beginning its prelude. After dinner was cleaned up, Jack went upstairs. I sighed, thinking he probably needed time, but less than 15 minutes later, a soft knock came at my bedroom door. Mom, are you busy? Turned around. Jack stood at the threshold, no phone, no earbuds, just my boy, now grown tall, with something unspoken in his eyes. I shook my head. Come in, sweetheart. Sit down in a chair, silent for a moment. Then he spoke, softly, as if afraid to shatter something fragile. You and Dad, you're okay again, aren't you? The question stunned me. I wanted to answer right away, but I paused. In his eyes, I didn't see curiosity, I saw concern. A quiet hope for clarity, but also a fear of being hurt. I'm not sure, I answered honestly. But I think we're starting to talk again, like real people. Jack nodded, then looked down. absent-mindedly tugging at a loose thread on the sleeve of his hoodie. I think I grew up in a house where people talked a lot, but never really said anything real. My throat tightened, and sometimes it felt like I was standing between two strangers trying to keep everything from falling apart. I walked over and sat next to him. I placed my hand gently over his. You don't have to do that, Jack. No child should ever carry that burden. Jack looked up, eyes red-rimmed. But if not me, then who? My heart shattered into pieces. I pulled him into a tight hug, the first real one in a very long time. And in that embrace, I realized something I'd never considered before. It was just Daniel and I who had been worn down by silence. Jack was a victim too, of all the empty spaces we had left behind. After he left the room, I sat alone, restless. Perhaps the journey toward healing doesn't begin with the marriage. It begins with the courage to face the wounds we've left on the ones we love most. A week after the conversation with Jack, the first snow of the season began to fall gently over the backyard. I stood by the window, watching the snowflakes drift down quietly, like time, like things long past. No noise, no brilliance, just a quiet presence. Daniel walked over, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa, one for him, one for me. We didn't say anything, but our eyes no longer avoided each other. Something had changed, not quite forgiveness, but recognition. I'm trying, Daniel said softly, genuinely. Not to go back to how things were, but to learn how to be the partner you deserve. I took the mug from him, my hand brushing his. The warmth didn't make me soft, it made me clear. I didn't respond. I didn't need to rush. Neither of us did. Far off, Jack was shoveling snow from the walkway, bundled in a thick coat and a hood pulled over his ears. But I saw him smile when a snowflake landed on his nose, and he tilted his head to the sky, receiving it like a joke from nature. I stepped outside and called, "Careful out there, or you'll catch a cold."